But if you're really interested in reducing inequality, I think you should be absolutely obsessed with urban housing policy. The Harvard economist Ross Chetty has pointed out that upward mobility in this country, when you build a map of it and see, who has the best chance of being born into a lower or working class and working their way into the upper middle class, it's in these cities. It's close to these cities. If we want to give more Americans a chance to move forward in their life, we should make it easier for people to live where they want to live, especially if those are some of the highest, most productive, most highly productive cities in the country. And in fact, Crystal, for much of the last century, this is how American migration worked. If you were working class, you would move closer to these cities and it would benefit you because the housing costs wouldn't overwhelm the income benefits that you would gain from moving to a high income place. But something has unwound very, very much in the last 50 years, where it's the cheapest places in the country that have the lowest upward mobility. And it's the most expensive places in the country that have the highest upward mobility. And so in a way you can say it's like the American dream has been torn apart. People have to choose between affordable living and the chance of moving forward in their life. That's a terrible, terrible thing for any country that considers itself the land of free opportunity. We want to build a country where people can move to where they want to move and people can stay where they want to stay. That's not the world we have in San Francisco and New York and Boston and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles and Seattle. And some people don't want to live there. And that's totally fine. And our project is not some grand design to force everybody to live in a skyscraper. People should live where they want to live. But part of freedom is being able to live near these cities if you want to stay there or work there. And that's where it's unbelievably urgent, I think, for the liberals and the Democrats who hold so much power in these places to use that power as an advertisement for our cause, to say, look what happens when you give us the reins and you give us all of the authority. We produce outcomes like affordability and upward mobility and low crime and fantastic living arrangements for people. Instead, right now, what's happening is that many blue cities and blue states have turned into anti-advertisements for the liberal movement. And as we say in the book, I think this is Ezra's line, I have to say, Democrats should be able to say, vote for us and we'll make America like California. And what's happened in the last few years is that Republicans have found advantage in saying, vote for Democrats and they'll make America like California. This is not the world we want to live in. And frankly, if these are the results that liberals are getting, they don't deserve to win at the national level. What we want to change is we want to change the meaning of the Democratic Party, the valence of the Democratic Party, starting with effective governance where we hold power the most.
Do you worry, Derek, that this leads to a bit of a cultural imbalance? Because part of what, make America more like Texas or make America more like Georgia is not, like you said, living in skyscrapers or even smaller. It's really about space, and abundance there also comes along with a cultural element of you just can kind of do whatever you want to do without monolithic beliefs being shoved in your face. So I think those two things do go hand in hand. Let's say for the 500,000 people who left the state of California for Texas and for Florida, that obviously was very important to them. How do you think about that question whenever you're thinking about making California, San Francisco great again as a template for why somebody in Milwaukee, Wisconsin would want to vote for you?
Yeah, that's right. No one's asked that question before. That's a really interesting question. So, you're talking about this idea of cultural freedom, of people being able to live the way they want to live. I think that's fantastic. I consider myself essentially a social libertarian, even though those ideas aren't particularly present in the book. But when I think about the most famous expressions of sort of laissez-faire, live how you want to live, sort of cultural libertarianism, I honestly think of cities.
Interesting.
I think of New York in the 1960s or San Francisco in the 1960s. I think of these places where all of these new ideas were bursting forth and colliding with each other, where people were having new concepts of poetry and music and, different ideas about, living arrangements and romantic arrangements. If what you're interested in is a world where people have this extraordinary freedom to explore their identity in a world where other people are exploring their identities, I think any honest look at American urban history from the last 50, 70 years shows it's cities that have been the cauldron of exactly this type of freedom. And of course, if people want to live in Georgia with their lawns and their single family houses, there's nothing in this book telling them that they're wrong to do so. what we're trying to say at a very basic level is there are some cities in this country, I mean, at least in the house for the housing part, because the book is capacious. In the housing part, there are some cities where the rules that we have created have made it impossible for market conditions to work. And while markets are not perfect, one thing they're very good at doing is matching supply and demand. And right now you have this enormous demand to live in places like Washington, D.C. and New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, but you have constraints to supply. And in macroeconomics one-on-one, the only thing that happens when demand goes like this and supply stays flat is prices go to the moon. Prices are going to the moon. And it's not just a problem for Los Angeles. It's a problem for Democrats nationwide. We just lost, Democrats did, an election that was all about affordability. And so being obsessed about the inputs to affordability, I think, is essential to any liberal movement making the public feel like we care about them again.
Okay.